Hey everyone, and welcome back to our Bible study. Today we're talking about Genesis chapter 20. Before we jump into chapter 20, I wanted to mention a few people had asked about our longer verse-by-verse studies that we're doing in Acts right now. I just wanted to let everybody know that we are going to get back to that. I kind of just had to find a rhythm with these shorter studies, how to edit them, get them uploaded to the website and YouTube and things, and to get in a nice flow. But now that we've gone through about 20 episodes, I think hopefully I've figured out how to a good rhythm for that, and so we can return to Acts, and we will shortly, and jump into Acts chapter 3. In case you were worried that those were going to disappear, they will not. Now, Genesis chapter 20 in 5 minutes. As always, there's a PDF with all this information on our website. There's a link down below. When did the events of this chapter take place? Well, Abraham was born in about 1996 BC. He lived for about 175 years. This took place in his 99th year of life, which would be approximately 1897 BC. I've got three main characters for this chapter. Abraham, who we are pretty familiar with at this point if you've been doing these studies. God was working through Abraham to bless the entire world through his descendants. Now his wife, who was named Sarah, she's our second main character. And interestingly, something we haven't mentioned so far is that she was his half-sister, which, yeah, that's pretty weird for most most of us in the modern world, but it wasn't so weird back then. And you think about it, there were only 8 people who made it off of the ark and survived the flood. This wasn't too long after that, and so you would have had to marry some people who were relatively close to you, and probably weren't all the genetic issues back then that exist in the modern day. But just know, Sarah was Abraham's half-sister. And then our final character is a guy named Abimelech. Now that seems to be not so much a proper name as it was a title of the rulers of certain areas. And this Abimelech was the king of Gerar. And speaking of Gerar, that is where most of this chapter plays out. And from my research, it doesn't seem like anybody knows exactly where Gerar was, but I've got a highlighted box on the map that will show you the general location of where most people think it was. So now for our outline. Verses 1 through 7 is our first chapter. I've entitled it Abraham, Sarah, and Abimelech. So after Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, Abraham and Sarah went to live between Kadesh and Shur in a region known as Gerar. There, they met Abimelech, who was the king of that area, and Abraham told Abimelech that Sarah was his sister, and he did that because he feared that if he told Abimelech that Sarah was his wife, the men of Gerar would kill him and take Sarah because she was a very beautiful woman. And she must have been a really beautiful woman because you think about it, at this point, she's 89 years old, and Abraham is still concerned about this. Well, lo and behold, Abimelech took Sarah into his house, intending to make her either his wife or his concubine. But God appeared to Abimelech in a dream and told him that he had taken a woman who belonged to another man. Abimelech told the Lord that he was unaware that he had done anything wrong. It says that he did it in the innocence and the integrity of his heart only after Abraham told him that Sarah was his sister. Now the Lord knew that Abimelech was telling the truth. His heart was pure and his intentions were good. And the Lord says that he kept Abimelech from having any kind of relations with Sarah. But he told him that he needed to give Sarah back or else he would surely die. And that leads us into our second section, verses 8 through 18. Abimelech returns Sarah to Abraham. So in the morning, after God had spoken to Abimelech, Abimelech called Abram, summoned him in, and he asked him why he had deceived him about this. And Abraham told him his fear that he knew Sarah was very beautiful. He thought the men of Gerar were godless and that they would kill him and take Sarah if they knew that they were married. So Abimelech returned Sarah to Abraham, and he gifted him sheep, oxen, and servants, and told him that he was free to live anywhere within his kingdom. In addition, he gave Abraham 1,000 pieces of silver as a sign or as a witness that he hadn't touched Sarah or defiled her in any way. Abraham then prayed for Abimelech, and the Lord healed his household, his wife, and their female slaves, because the text says that the Lord had closed all of the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of this situation with Sarah. So Abraham prays and the situation is resolved and the problem is resolved. And so that is Genesis chapter 20. Now let's talk about an application. God guides those who are pure of heart in unseen ways. Because Abimelech's motives were pure, God kept him from sinning with Sarah. But what's really interesting is that Abimelech was completely unaware of God's intervention in that situation until God told him. And that leaves us with the question, well, how exactly did God keep Abimelech from having relations with Sarah? And we just don't know. Perhaps he caused his chariot to break down while he was on his way home. Perhaps he got caught up at work with some issue, had to do some overtime. Perhaps he had an unexpected trip to another city to help a friend or some family members, right? We just aren't told. What we know is that God protected a man with good intentions from making a mistake. And I see no reason to believe that God doesn't work this way even today. God guides those who are pure of heart, who want to do what is right, often in unseen ways, in ways that we may not even be aware of. And that's part of the reason that Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil."